Hello and welcome back to the Tina Creates YouTube channel. I'm glad you are joining me today for video 2 in this very short card series. And surprise, surprise, this is the background panel I end up using. So if you haven't yet watched my first video, please go back and have a look because it shows you the process of how I created these backgrounds. So make sure you check that out. And please let me know if you had a favorite from any of those because I had one epic fail, but I had two successful backgrounds. So let me know what your favorite is in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And surprise, surprise, if you stick around, you will see how on the left here, I created the peacock feather element that's going on my card later. So I'm going to be showing you that very shortly. Uh, but in the meantime, I'm just creating my card panels first up, getting it ready so that I can put all the other elements onto the card and go into the cutting processes and any other digital processes I have to do. Please make sure that you stick around so that you see those digital processes and what's involved with those, because the aim of today's video is not just to show you how this card actually turned out, and I was really happy with it, but what the Silhouette Cameo and the software that is used to control it, what it can do. It really is a powerful system if you are willing to put the time and effort in to use a machine like that to do card making. It doesn't always have to be a stamping, embossing, just a manual process. So I like to combine both because you will see later, and again, that's why I say stick around. I'm going to be doing some head embossing, but I'm going to be cutting that sentiment out on my Silhouette Cameo. So I really look forward to you seeing that. All right, this next process is me seeing in Adobe Illustrator. The reason I use Adobe Illustrator is because I have a background in graphic design and finish art. So I do know how to use this software to the best of my ability. And this image that I found that I thought really complemented this card is from freepick.com. I'll include a link to their website below. They are a subscription-based service. And just as we watch the rest of this process, it's about how I'm creating the cut line that's going to be used in Silhouette Studio later in this video. Silhouette Studio, that's the software that also controls the Silhouette Cameo, also has capability of creating cut lines in its software too. But because of some of the edits I wanted to do, I wanted to create the white version and the black white version just to see what was best. I used Illustrator for that purpose. But you'll be able to see later when we do our heat embossing how Silhouette Studio can create cut lines for you in a very unique way. So make sure you keep watching for that. I am pulling out now to create this heat embossed sentiment, the Billowing Peonies stamp set from Altenew. Now, I'm not a big stamper, but I had my eye on this stamp set for so, so long. It was, I'm going to say it was an investment stamp set because it isn't cheap here in Australia. I think it retails for about 55 Australian dollars. So I just went, you know what, I'm just going to buy it and enjoy using it. And I think what I do really like this font that they have in this stamp set, so I've gone for this one today. Something that's simple. Today will be the best day ever. I'm going to heat emboss this sentiment in a silver embossing powder. It's a Wow embossing powder. Again, I'm going to link it in the description below. I had a few different sort of shades and I had some with glitters in them, but this one I thought would be most legible. Remember when you're creating your cards that you want to create a sentiment that's going to be easy to read still amongst anything else that's going on in your card, especially with the background like what I've chosen to create for this card. You want to make sure that you have a sentiment that doesn't get lost. So I've kept the colors still reasonably simple. I haven't used too many different colors. After finding that one of my embossing powder like prep powders wasn't working very well, one of the containers, I reached for another one just so that I could get my powder really, really, really heavy on the sheet because I'm not the world's best heat embosser and I always end up with a big mess and my embossing powder going everywhere. So I wanted to be really coated so it would have a nice clean finish. I'm actually going to link the paper stock that I used for this because you'll see it gives such a lovely crisp finish when it's done and put on the final card design. It is a smooth laser paper. It's inkjet and laser compatible. I think it's here in Australia, a particular brand. And I found it's probably worked best. It's one of the best stocks I've used for heat embossing. So I was really pleased with the finished product. I had a few issues when I was stamping down this sentiment the first few times. It just wasn't filling out properly. This is a stamping platform I haven't used before, so even though I sort of thought I'd prepped my stamp correctly and ran my fingers over it, maybe it's because it was still a new platform. Um, as it turned out, I changed my embossing ink pad. I went back to my trusty Versamark and it worked like a dream. So you'll see even after I do multiple goes at the same sentiment, it just doesn't want to fill in properly. So I give up on that one and Versamark does the trick. I end up stamping a couple of sentiments on the one piece of paper, and it's because I thought, well, if one doesn't stamp very well or heat emboss very well, I've got another one to use. It's also because of how I end up cutting out the sentiments on my silhouette cameo later. I just wanted to have a spare in case. And thankfully I did, because you will see some of the manual work I have to do later to make sure that sentiment's nice and neat. Something to remember, a silhouette cameo with certain extras, certain ways it cuts, isn't always perfect. It's just like a manual die cutter. It's not going to always die cut your piece or your sentiment perfectly. 9 times out of 10 it will, depending on what you set up. But in this case, it was actually the mat itself and how it went from the software to the mat and how the machine read where the cut was meant to go, that it just didn't come up the way it should have. And sometimes these things happen with these machines. It's just something you have to work around and deal with. Tidying up, the usual process of making sure that embossing powder doesn't get all over the workspace. I always like to go in with the very fine tip brush, which if you're an avid heat embosser, you've probably seen a lot of YouTube videos today that show you, e.g. Kathy Zilski, hi Kathy, to go in and just give it a really good tidy. You don't want any of that stray embossing powder getting heated onto the paper and ruining the look of your final sentiment, because there's nothing worse after you've gone to the time and effort of creating the sentiment in the first place and stamped it down. The smooth paper that I used really helped this process as well. It was really easy to just get rid of all that stray embossing powder, so it was nice and neat. Heat gun on, warming up. As we all love, as we all love, that in, as we all love that sentiment comes to life. Still my favourite thing to see to this date. I hope you guys do too. Okay, we are now in Silhouette Studio. So this is what I've used. This is a pick scan mat. If you aren't sure what a pick scan mat is, I'm going to link in the description below to some videos that talk about how the pick scan mat's used. But basically, using the software, I've been able to scan in my embossed sentiments that are showing here on the screen. The pick scan mat allows you to do this so you can cut your own creations. In this case, I'm cutting a sentiment. I want to select with the Silhouette Trace software under the Pick Scan software the area that I want to cut. I want to create a die line on these sentiments. Now, first, it didn't quite read my sentiment too well. It has an area that recognizes, a tool that recognizes what's been scanned and particular areas of those scans. Once it selected the area correctly, I then play with the threshold in this trace area in Silhouette Studio to select the entire area that I want to create a trace outline on. You can see here how it can be quite detailed in what it finds and doesn't find. Once you click that trace outer edge, I can now offset the path using the offset tool, and I can choose how many mil out I want it to offset. Now this is where I played around a bit again. Some of it felt a bit too much of an offset, too much of a border. So I pulled it back just a little bit and pulled out the little daggies using the direct selection tool. These little elements here are very similar to what Adobe Illustrator utilizes in that it has nodes and vectors that are selected with the mouse. To save myself some time, I rotated the offset cut line that I'd already created and duplicated it and dragged it down to the other sentiment. The die lines, as I'm going to call them, when you cut something, it's like when you have metal dies that you might use on a manual die cut machine. We're still creating die lines to be cut on a digital machine, in this case, the Cameo. The red strokes there indicate the cut line, and I'm currently choosing the settings to send to the Cameo 5 to cut on the Pick Scan mat. This isn't an overly thick cardstock as a smooth cardstock as well. So what I did end up doing, and this is what you'll see, is this is where there's always human error and also trial and error involved with these machines, especially if you're jumping between different types of cutting mats, because originally for many, many years, Silhouette Cameos have relied on sticky mats, which is just what this Pick Scan mat is. But if you've seen Silhouette these days, they can sell and sell very well the electrostatic mats, which is the other mat that I have. So I do swap between these two mats. Normal mat, Pick Scan mat, electrostatic mat. Electrostatic mats are best for papers, they're great. But in the case of this sentiment I'm creating today, the PicSpan mat was able to scan and register what I'd already created myself, that I can now cut myself in a custom way. Because of the settings that I didn't quite get right, I had to cut it about 3 times, and you'll see it very shortly. The settings I start with are around a force of 20, a speed of 4, a blade depth of 4, but I do up and change it just slightly. So you will see that very shortly in the video. Now I hope I haven't lost you, but I hope this also shows you the processes that are involved with these machines. I'm showing this footage because I want card makers to understand what they're getting into at times when you think about buying an electronic machine, because they really are beneficial to your process and they can branch you out from so many techniques and things you've already learned to a whole new level. Okay, this is the pick scan mat. I'm just popping it into my Silhouette Cameo machine, making sure it's lined up correctly to the guides because the last thing you want is for it to feed poorly or cut poorly. So per the software footage, I do cut this 3 times, and it's due to settings on my manual DB09 blade. I don't use a Silhouette auto blade much these days. I still have a few, but I find I get much better results with the DB09 blade. And over time, I realize how much money I've paid for Silhouette auto blades. And whilst they're a lot easier at times to use, and I still had issues with this blade on the day, I knew how to fix it. The cut of the blade is much sharper, and I find these blades last a lot longer. I get a lot more for my money as well. It's just that, yeah, I probably made an error in my settings and my blade settings. And I know that those things happen sometimes. It's not always, yep, it works on the first go. But this is the beauty of a pick scan mat in that if you are a bit of a manual card maker and you like to do heat embossing and you want to cut it, but you don't have the dies to do it, or maybe you don't like fussy cutting. I know I don't really like fussy cutting much, but as you'll see very shortly, this is how I fixed my sentiment because it didn't cut really in the way I wanted it to anyway. And this is what I mean. If you have a look at my sentiment, even though on screen in the Silhouette software, the offset die cut line was perfect, it hasn't cut perfect on my machine. So I did go in with the fussy cutting. I have these uniquely creative scissors. I'll link them in the description below if you're interested. They're really nice to use actually. Uniquely Creative is an Australian company as well. They make some lovely stuff. But yeah, had to cut the sentiment myself. Wasn't ideal, but at least it got cut the way I wanted it to be cut in the end. And you'll see on the finished card that it looks really good. I foiled using a toner foil the peacock feather that I printed from the free pick image. I printed it onto a toner printer. If you're not sure about foiling, jump on YouTube. I'm hoping to do some videos in the future that talk about different types of foiling. I particularly do a lot of toner foiling because I have the control over the design that I want to do. Just going into the final put together of the card. I took a long time working out the placement of the elements for this card. I just couldn't quite get in my head how it was going to work. But then I went, yep, no, this placement's right. It's balanced, especially against the busy background that I already created. I just wanted to make sure it was legible, it was easy to read, there was just enough complementary colours going on, enough to show off the peacock design, enough to still see the background I put all that time into creating. These little foam dots are actually from Kmart of all things, and they have little tabs on them, so they're really easy to get off and to apply onto anything you're putting on your cards, really. I have a little T-square ruler. Again, I'll link it in the description below, but I'm a bit particular about the alignment of my sentiments. There's nothing worse than a wonky sentiment. Last but not least, the fun part is choosing what embellishment I want to put on my final card, just to add that little bit of extra bling. Again, I haven't gone too wild on the color choice. I've kept it quite similar. I found that these little pearls, they're sort of a metallic pearl. I think I might have got them from Uniquely Creative as well. They tie into the peacock feather nicely. Thinking about visual balance now in this card coming together, this is the other reason that I left that distinct white border at the start of the video when I placed the background on. I wanted there to be enough white space to amplify that background as well. If I'd put the background onto the card base and not left some form of border and then proceeded with this card creation, it would have looked far too busy. And remember, you still want your sentiment to stand out. You still want your elements to stand out, but not be taken away by other busy elements. This is my finished card. Thank you so much for tuning in for part 2 with me. I hope you really liked the finished card, and if you do, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, make sure you check out the link coming up at the end of this video.